All right, so tonight we're going to do the cardiovascular system. That includes your heart, blood vessels, and of course the blood itself. So we're going to be taking a look at the different structures. We're going to be taking a look at the design of the heart and loosely how it functions. So let's go ahead and get cracking into it. So first and foremost, with every physiological system, we always want to start usually with the functions of the system. It's very important and very vital that we understand, well, why do we have this system and what is it doing for our bodies? So what exactly is the cardiovascular system? We loosely associate it and call it a transport and delivery system. So in this instance, we see the first function is transportation. So our blood or circulatory system and blood itself, as we'll see the makeup and composition of it, carries all of these like nutrients and carbon dioxide. It carries the hormones and everything we've seen throughout itself. It's like the lazy river, I guess you could say, of the body, transporting all of the valuable vitamins, nutrients, hormones, so on and so forth that the body needs to all the places that need it. With that, we also say inside the blood system, we also have the white blood cells. So we do see how the heart can play a role in protection, namely like our immune response, because it can bring white blood cells and other natural killer cells and stuff like that to an area to essentially kill off pathogens and fight infection and so on and so forth. So yes, that kind of loosely just locks into the transportation system, in my opinion. But another thing is that one of the larger responsibilities of the cardiovascular system is that it wants to maintain pressure in the system. And so if we happen to have, let's say, a leak in the system, a pressure leak, aka you get a cut, then we want to plug and stop that. So in this case, combating hemorrhage, we're going to look at a few various cells regarding the cardiovascular system, one of which is thrombocytes that are going to create clots and then to repair and block off, preventing blood loss. We do not want to hemorrhage. Hemorrhage is blood loss. Well, I guess should also probably be labeled too is, as we said, it's a pickup and delivery system, a transport and delivery system. We're also in the sense of like us transporting vital, useful stuff to areas. We're also picking up waste and other things as well and cycling it to where it needs to be for filtration and, removal and so on and so forth. So for instance, the easiest thing we can talk about in the sense of pickup and delivery is we're going to pick up oxygen from the lungs, transport it to the various cells, all the cells of our body, and exchange that carbon dioxide for that the cells are producing for the oxygen that we have in the blood system, and as well as any metabolic waste and so on and so forth. So we're picking up all of these things, we're delivering all the things we need to all the different places of the body. So the composition of blood, as we were just mentioning here, what exactly is blood made of, and what exactly makes our blood brighter versus, say a little bit darker? So blood is largely composed of a liquid matrix of connective tissue, which is, plasma. I guess that's on the next slide. But we also find that there's lots of different cells in blood itself, and largest numerous cell is going to be the erythrocytes, red blood cells, which what makes blood look red. Now we'll see a little bit of detail about the erythrocytes here in a second, about how they have an iron-based protein called hemoglobin that, when exposed to oxygen, makes them look brighter. Think about how iron oxidizes in rust, and that rust is a bright orange. Similar kind of concept to the red blood cells. And so when the blood cells have carbon dioxide, it doesn't make it look as bright, and thus it is a more dull, darker color. So based off of the oxygen content, as the slide here explains, we have the differing color of blood, as we could say. No, blood is not blue, if you need to know. I know it looks blue in your veins, but it's there's the exact science I can't remember, but there's some way that the light refracts off of the skin and the blood vessel itself that makes it look like it's blue, but it is not, I assure you. So all of these different blood cells, we've come across this before in other lectures, but to produce new blood cells is called hematopoiesis, and we've touched on that in a different topic. And we do produce white and red blood cells, and the process gets pretty involved. But just for our sakes of purpose for massage therapy, just knowing that the process is hematopoiesis to produce the new and train new red blood cells and white blood cells and so on and so forth. So blood plasma is, as we said, the leading component of blood itself. And so you probably heard of people donating plasma, right? So the plasma is that liquid matrix that, like I said, is connective tissue that flows through your blood. And as we can see in this little image, if we zoom in, we can see that there's the various cells floating, like I said, through that lazy river here. And this even almost looks like the red blood cells, looks like a little inner tube, but here's some of our major cells, right? Such as some of our white blood cells, neutrophils, macrophages, lymphocytes. We have the thrombocytes right here. We have the red blood cells, of course, as well. And as we mentioned, there would be metabolic waste, hormones, other things floating and traveling through that system as well. So, cracking into the cells themselves, what are erythrocytes? And what allows them to carry oxygen and carbon dioxide, and how are they shaped? So, erythrocytes are the red blood cells, as we just mentioned, and these red blood cells are just the mindless worker drones of the body. They are designed to essentially transport nutrients, and especially largely the oxygen and carbon dioxide of the body, to and from the various places of the body. So these erythrocytes, red blood cells, are so hardworking, they deserve their respect. Matter of fact, you could even say they deserve their RESPECT, erythrocytes, like Aretha Franklin. Aretha Franklin sites. That's usually my joke to associate how to remember them. Hopefully it wasn't too cringy. But these red blood cells contain, as we mentioned previously, the hemoglobin, the hemoglobin inside themselves, which allows the molecular structures of carbon dioxide and oxygen to bind to it and be transported. And if it matters, a red blood cell can transport up to 4 molecules in and of itself, if that's important to you. And as we said, the shape is bioconcaved. We've probably all seen a depiction of a red blood cell, and it looks like a flattened jelly donut. And the reason for that is, one, it allows the cell to contort in shape, because we're going to look at some various blood vessels, namely the capillaries, where the capillaries are so small and thin that typically only one cell can pass through at a time, and it's almost so narrow that the red blood cell has to kind of contort, which also helps it to release its products and then pass through the membrane of that capillary to then go into the interstitial space to then be absorbed by the neighboring cells and tissues of the body. And so another reason why it's bioconcaved is it allows for the expansion of the cell as it absorbs and retains water, because one of the things we do transport in the cardiovascular system is water as well. So alongside the erythrocytes, the red blood cells, we have leukocytes. And what purpose do they serve? Well, leukocytes are our white blood cells. If you think that something is lukewarm, as we would say, lukewarm meaning that it's not very hot and fresh, almost cold, we could say, that it's underdone. And if something's underdone, it's white and bland, I guess you could say, if that's one way to associate what a leukocyte is. But anyways, white blood cells, and there's lots of them in the category, all serving various specific purposes, but the general purpose is aiding the body's immune response and physical defense. like physiological defense here. As we can see in this box here, we do have the various types of white blood cells. The most common that we'll probably ever pay attention to are the lymphocytes, specifically, just primary immune responders. But we do have other specifically designed ones that target specific, infectious agents and, coming in to remove cellular waste and so on and so forth. But we don't need to get too far into all of those. In my opinion, I don't think we'll be tested too much on those. We do touch on the different phagocytes and penocytes as well in the Intro to Anatomy lecture, where we talked about, cellular eating versus cellular drinking. Those typically remove the waste of the body, but they are labeled as leukocytes. And then our other cell that we're paying attention to of the cardiovascular system is the thrombocytes. And how exactly is a platelet plug formed? Well, first, if we break down the word throm, if we broke down any of the previous words, erythemia, right? Eryth means red. Leuc means white. Cyte means cell. So erythrocyte literally means red cell. Leukocyte literally means white cell. Thrombocyte, well, throm means blood clot, means to clot. So thrombocytes are the blood clotting cells of the cardiovascular system, and they're responsible for creating platelet plugs. And as we said, we want to combat hemorrhage in this system. And so whenever we have exposed or like say leaks in the, walls of blood vessels, well, we're going to produce some fibrin and create what's sort of like a mesh network. Think like if I were to punch a hole in this drywall, and for those who've ever repaired a hole in drywall, usually you put that little tape, the little mesh tape down, and then you put some spackle over it. That's essentially what we're doing for these in the sense of creating a platelet plug. We create a mesh network out of the fibrin, which is a form of connective tissue, and that allows red blood cells and thrombocytes to essentially coagulate and block the hole, basically. And so then, of course, that leads to your scabs, so on and so forth, and to essentially stop further blood loss. Now, when it comes to blood, I'm sure you've heard that you have a blood type. There are 4 generic blood types. And paying attention to them, we have what's called universal donors and universal recipients. So what exactly is the thing that's giving us our blood types? Well, our red blood cells have on them what's called antigens. And these antigens have a particular type. So the 2 types of antigens we have are A and B. But then sometimes we have blood that is mixed with both antigens, A and B. And then we have blood cells, red blood cells, with no antigens at all, which we call blood type O. So think about it like this. One side of the street does not like the other side of the street. East side versus west side. A's versus B's. A doesn't like B, B doesn't like A. Now, of course, there's always a little bit of romance in the, Shakespearean, theatrical play of Romeo and Juliet, where we have Romeo and Juliet from Romeo B side, Juliet A side, coming together in holy matrimony. A and B, well, we all know that doesn't end too well, but we have A and B. So that means that A and B is cool with either or. So if A doesn't like B and B doesn't like A, we cannot give type A blood to a B type blood, and especially an O. But if we gave A blood to an AB person, then they can receive that. So type O and type AB are our universal donors and universal recipients. Type AB is able to receive blood from anybody. And we'll get into some specifics about positives and negatives. And then type O, being that it has no antigens, is sweet and it's as neutral as possible. And so anybody can receive type O. Now, we further split the blood types into positive versus negative. So all of these blood types, all four of these blood types can be positive or negative. What the negative means that you are either positive or negative means you're positive or negative for what's called the RH factor. And that limits you even further. If your blood type is positive, then you can take positive or negative blood. If your blood type is negative, you cannot take positive type blood. So if we go a step further, type O negative blood is the absolute most universal donor. And then type AB positive is the most absolute universal recipient. And we do have a little video here in which we can play. And so as you see, A positive blood can only go to type A positive and type B, AB positive. A negative, as you'll see, will go to both sides here, both having A's in the name. And then we have B positive, which, you know, same. Oh, it's not going to play the video when I zoom in. Oh, guess not. And then B positive, again, going to the B's, but only on the positive side. B negative, going to the B's on both sides. Then we'll see that type O positive can go to all of them on the positive side. O negative, we'll see, goes to every single person in this particular case. So O negative is the absolute universal donor. Anybody can take O type negative. And then AB positive can only go to AB positive people. AB negative can only go to AB negative and AB positive. So hopefully shouldn't matter for your actual massage business and performing massage of having to do a blood transfer, but yeah, maybe find it on your test or something like that. What surrounds the heart? So we're getting into the structures of the heart itself, and the heart, right? We want to protect our heart. We want to keep it, you know, nice and insulated. So we surround it in its own little sac called the pericardium. Peri means surrounding. Cardium refers to the heart itself. So the pericardium is this little double layered sac here that has quite a few different layers. So we have, you know, fibrous pericardium, parietal pericardium. Then we have a bit of a space here, and then we have the visceral pericardium, which is, if we look at those are our serous membranes. So they produce serous fluid, which help to reduce the friction of those structures and tissue layers moving. Then we go through the different layers of the heart, which is pretty much the same thing here. So we have the epicardium, which is the visceral pericardium here, which is the outermost layer of the heart itself. The epicardium is this yellow layer right here. And then we have the myocardium. If we break that word down, myo means muscle. So this is the muscular layer of the heart, and it is the thickest layer of the heart because the heart is essentially just muscle, right? As we'll see, the functionality is it's just trying to contract to pump the blood throughout our entire body. And then we have the innermost layer, which is on the inside walls of the heart itself, called the endocardium, which, you know, when we look at all the other various types of structures, we see that that line up very consistently, right? Epi is usually the outermost layer. Peri, and obviously falls out of favor in this case, but peri usually means the middle layer. And then endo is always our innermost layer. So in this case, we have the epicardium being the outermost layer. That is within the pericardium, the pericardial sac. Then we have the myocardium, the muscular layer, and then the endocardium on the innermost layer. Now, going further into the structures of the heart, and we do have a little depiction that I drew here that'll hopefully be something you can draw and recreate on yourselves to remember the flow of blood through the heart in this particular case. So the heart consists of 4 chambers. We have 2 on top and 2 on bottom. We have 2 on the left, 2 on the right. So the 4 chambers are the atria and the ventricles. So we have 2 on the top. The 2 superior chambers are the atria. And then the 2 inferior chambers are the ventricles. So this means we have a left and right atrium and a left and right ventricle. The trabeculae carneae are just the fibrous structures in the walls of the heart itself that just help to allow the heart to pump blood more efficiently. So, just a little fun fact there. And then we have valves. So the heart itself is chamber. So think like, okay, so we had these chambers of the heart. And if you think about an old-timey word for your room, well, chambers were that word, right? Think about the Edgar Allan Poe, The Raven, right? Rap, rap, tapping on my chamber door, right? Chamber means, an enclosed space. So in this particular case, we had the 4 chambers. Well, those chambers are locked off by valves. Why? Because we don't want blood traveling back through the system. We always want blood flowing in one direction in the cardiovascular system. So we're going to find quite a few different valves in this particular case. And they usually will partition off either the chambers or the blood vessels, namely the arteries that exit or take the blood away from the heart. So we have what we call atrioventricular valves, and then we have semilunar valves. So the atrioventricular valves are the valves in between the atrium and the ventricle. So on the right side, we have the tricuspid valve, and on the left side, we have the bicuspid valve, which is also known as the mitral valve. Then we have the semilunar valves, which exist between the ventricles and the arteries leading away from the heart. So on the right side, we have the pulmonary semilunar valve, which we'll take a look at in a second. And on the left side, we have the aortic semilunar valve. So as we're guessing, right, our heart is attempting to pump blood through the system. And so we have a rate at which it does this. So heart rate, as we all are aware of, is the beats per minute that the heart is producing to pump blood. Now, normal resting heart rate is somewhere between 60 to 80 beats per minute. And then we have these 2 pathological conditions called tachycardia and bradycardia, which indicate that the heart is pumping, relatively fast or slow. So tachycardia, I like to give the example that a tachyometer, if you know what a tachyometer is, then good. If you don't know what a tachyometer is, you actually do. You just didn't know that it was a tachyometer. A tachyometer is a device that measures revolutions per minute, and you look at one almost every day as long as you have a car and drive it. So a tachyometer is that the RPMs on your dashboard, your revolutions per minute. That is measuring how many times that thing is rotating or how many times it is cycling. So tachycardia, in this case, thinking of the car version, right? RPMs is a lot, right? It's 1,000 per each number you see on your RPM meter in your car. So this means tachycardia refers to a heart rate that is over 100, consistent heart rate over 100 beats per minute. And then bradycardia refers to a heart rate that is lower than 50 beats per minute. And how I usually like to make people remember the bradycardia, and this example gets dated more and more times farther out we go in history here, but typically professional athletes will have, because their heart is well conditioned, have a lower resting heart rate because the heart is more adequately trained to pump blood. That professional athletes have lower resting heart rates. And if you think about an all-star professional athlete, Tom Brady might have a low resting heart rate. Yes, I know some people might remember this guy and be like, "Oh, Tom Brady," but whatever. Needless to say, hopefully that example isn't dated in the next few years, 10 years, 20 years. People might get it. But tachycardia, excessive heart rate; bradycardia, lower heart rate. All right, so going through the flow of blood through the heart and explaining the cardiac cycles. Well, here is a picture, but I want to show you my drawing. Now, hopefully, this drawing, you should be able to recreate on your own, and I know I got the glare in there, I'm sorry, let me see. So you can kind of freeze frame that and maybe draw that a little bit on your own. But let me go ahead and try to explain the madness we have going on here. So we've gone and drawn a cheeky little heart the best we can. So here is the right side of the heart, here is the left side of the heart, and I've labeled each step of the process of the way through with all the various structures. So this is imagining if we were a singular red blood cell, in which way do we travel and loop-de-loop through the heart? Well, first step of the process involves these blood vessels right here. We have what's called the superior and inferior vena cava. These two veins are the main veins that take blood from all of the body back to the heart. All blood is dumped back to the heart via these two veins. And so once we have once this blood vessel goes through the superior or inferior vena cava, it's going to enter the first superior chamber, which is on the right side. So we have the right atrium right here. Then, as we said, we had valves. We passed through our first atrioventricular valve, known as the tricuspid valve, which then leads us into the right ventricle. And then we pass through our first semilunar valve, which happens to be between the ventricle and the pulmonary artery. So we have the pulmonary semilunar valve. And then now the blood cell is in the pulmonary artery. The pulmonary artery, which, you know, for sakes of understanding, pulm or pulmonary refers to the lung or respiratory system. So this pulmonary artery is going to take that blood cell all the way to the lungs, because the whole purpose of traveling and sending blood through the heart and circulatory system is to exchange carbon dioxide for oxygen in the lungs. So we're going to send this red blood cell to the lungs, which is then going to pass through a little capillary system around the alveoli. And when we get to the respiratory system, that'll all make sense. And then it's going to exchange the carbon dioxide that the red blood cell has for the oxygen around in the lungs themselves through a process called diffusion. Then, once we have oxygen from the lungs, we're going to come back to the heart. And we come back to the heart via what's called the pulmonary veins. So the pulmonary veins are taking the blood back from the lungs to the heart, which leads to now the left atrium. From the left atrium, we pass through the second atrioventricular valve, which is the bicuspid valve, also known as the mitral valve, into the left ventricle. From the left ventricle, we're then passing through our last semilunar valve, which is the aortic semilunar valve, because that's putting us into the aorta, which then the aorta travels through the rest of the body, then leading to blood going everywhere. So every blood vessel is branched off of the aorta, if you think about it. And that is the cycle of the cardiovascular system. So if we actually go back to, you know, I guess a bit more natural depiction of the heart, well, we can see just like that, right? And we have these arrows in this case, right? Here's our superior and inferior vena cava, taking blood into the right atrium, passing through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle, passing through the pulmonary artery, which is then taking blood to the lungs. The pulmonary veins are bringing blood back to the heart, going through into the left atrium, passing through the mitral, aka bicuspid valve, into the left ventricle, passing through the aortic semilunar valve into the aorta, which then goes through the rest of the body. And that is how it works. Now, what exactly is happening when the heart pumps? Because it's not a step-by-step process like that. Technically, we split it up into 3 cardiac cycles, and we don't need to be so specific, but I just want to explain the idea of what's happening. So your heart is a pump, and it works by pumping with pressure. Your heart contracts. Namely, the ventricular walls are going to contract. And when those ventricular walls contract, we create high pressure. We create high pressure here in the ventricles, which, well, if you've ever squeezed a water bottle that was open, what happens with the water bottle? It shoots out the top. So in this particular case, if we squeeze this container of blood, it's going to go through into, or go through those valves and into the respective arteries. So now think about the same thing. If I squeeze that water bottle and then let go, well, the water gets pulled back in. So this is the point of the valves, right? The valves prevent the backward flow. So the atrioventricular valves, right, prevent blood from going back this way. We don't want that to happen. So it only allows blood to go into the ventricles. And then the semilunar valves only allow blood to go into the arteries. They don't allow for the backwards flow of blood. So that means when the ventricles relax, it sucks blood from the atria into them. So if you ever clasp your hands like this, right, when you squeeze your hands, the air escapes. When you relax your hands, you can hear the air sucking back in to your clasped hands. And that's how your heart works. So technically, what happens is both ventricles contract, pushing blood into the pulmonary artery and the aorta, and then they relax, pulling blood from the atria into them. So, and that's the basic principle of the cardiac cycle. And then blood just travels through the rest of the body. Now, as we said, this heart is going to contract, and as we've learned from the muscular system, well, muscles need electrical stimulation or innervation from the nervous system in order to contract. So our heart has several conduction centers in them that allow and make sure that the heart is pumping blood in a rhythmic pace. So much so that we want to make sure that the heart has electrical stimulation, even if the nervous system somehow kind of gets loosely offset. So we have a few things. The biggest part of this, as the question asks, what is known as the pacemaker of the heart? Well, the sinoatrial node is known as the pacemaker of the heart. Why? Because this is the chief structure responsible for regulating the contraction of the heart and regulating the beating of the heart. We also have the atrioventricular node, the AV node as it's listed there, the bundles of His and the Purkinje fibers, all assisting with these actions as well. But the sinoatrial node is essentially just like a battery, right? And we call it the pacemaker because if you know what a pacemaker is, it's an electrical device implanted to, produce an electric shock to make sure that the heart pumps on rhythm, on cycle, in the absence of other things. So it's actually very interesting that the sinoatrial node will keep its electrical current for roughly about a minute, even after it's completely disconnected from the nervous system. So you ever seen those videos of like in the old timey kung fu movies where they just and they rip someone's heart out and it's still beating in their hand? It would actually still be doing that. It's not very realistic that someone would just rip someone's heart out of their chest, but the fact that it was still beating is actually true. So looking at the blood vessels, we'll take a deeper look, but let's just say, for the sake of ease and convenience on this particular question, our blood vessels are cold and they like to wear shirts. And an old-timey word for a shirt is a tunic. Now there's 3 layers, and it's as simple as it could be, right? Tunica interna is the innermost layer, media, middle, externa, outermost layer. So tunic is literally just a shirt, basically. It's an old time way to say shirt. And so these are just the different layers of the blood vessels. So these blood vessels can perform what's called vasodilation or vasoconstriction, which I'm pretty sure if you've ever gone to the eye doctor, you've heard of dilation, right? And when you have your pupils dilated, well, they get really, really wide. So dilation is the widening of the blood vessel, in this case, vaso meaning vessel, blood vessel. Vasodilation is the widening of the blood vessel, and vasoconstriction is to cause a narrowing of that passageway, which will then either, allow blood to flow freely or constrict the blood and allowing it to, not flow as freely. And a fun term here, lumen, refers to the passageway in the blood vessel itself. A couple other terms we have here are hyperemia and ischemia. Hyperemia, well, if we take that word down, hyper meaning excessive, emia refers to blood. So hyperemia means excessive blood flow, while ischemia means a lack of blood flow. So in this particular case, as we can see, as massage therapists, we're all very familiar with this natural occurrence, the hyperemia to the surface of the skin, right? That's usually the sign of a good massage, right? Getting that blood flow going in our clients. Arteries and veins, arterioles versus venules. What are we looking at here? So arteries are the vessels of the cardiovascular system that are specifically carrying blood away from the heart into the various parts of the body. Veins are the blood vessels that are now carrying blood from all the different parts of the body back towards the heart. Arterioles and venules just happen to be the smaller versions of those structures. So as we can see, we have a big branched artery here, and then it branches off into smaller little pieces called arterioles. Same thing with the veins and venules. But to just kind of explain the pulmonary circuit of itself, right? These arteries then just split into microscopic units called capillaries, which will be on another slide here in a second. And this is where the nutrient exchange occurs in the body, right? So the capillaries, like we were saying earlier, are just so thin, so small, they just allow for the permeation of the substances into and out of the area, which then travel through the system to be, disposed of or deliver the goods, sort of say. Now, a fun fact is that, as we said, arteries are carrying blood away from the body, or excuse me, away from the heart to the rest of the body. Veins are carrying blood back from the rest of the body to the heart. A general rule, actually a very consistent rule, is that arteries have oxygenated blood in them, which is logical, right? Because if we're going to be taking this blood to all the different parts of the body, we want them to have oxygen because we want to be able to deliver the oxygen to those body parts. And then veins have deoxygenated blood, or carbon dioxide rich blood, because now we need to take it back to the heart to get more oxygen. There is only one exception to this rule, and that exists in the heart, in the picture that we saw. Obviously, the pulmonary artery by nature is taking blood away from the heart, so therefore it is an artery. But in this case, I'm sending carbon dioxide rich blood to the heart because, well, I needed to get oxygen. So why would I send oxygen rich blood to the lungs to get more oxygen, right? So I have to send carbon dioxide rich blood to the lungs, and then vice versa, right? Now, so this oxygenated blood in the lungs has to come back to the heart through veins, the pulmonary veins. So in this particular case, the pulmonary circuit is the only instance in which the roles of oxygen concentration of the blood is reversed. So remember, arteries carry blood away from the heart, artery away, and they carry oxygen-rich blood, where veins carry the carbon dioxide-rich blood back to the heart. And then only in the pulmonary circuit, so the pulmonary artery and the pulmonary veins are the only blood vessels that have that role reversed. So what is blood pressure? What is considered normal blood pressure? What are these numbers and ratios you might have seen before at any given time? So, well, blood pressure is, well, the pressure that is measured on the walls of the arteries in the cardiovascular system. And as we've seen before, right, we've seen a number, like as we've seen here, 120/80, right? So we have one big number over a little number, and if we reduce that fraction, it's 1 1/4, right? Something like that, or 1 1/2, I think, if you want to reduce fractions. But 120 over 80. So this top number is a lot bigger, and we call the top number systolic pressure, or the systole stage there. And then our bottom number is diastolic. So what exactly are these numbers representing? So the diastolic pressure represents the amount of pressure that is just consistently present through the system. So if you drop dead, this is the amount of pressure immediately, like if your heart just stops pumping, that's just the pressure in the system. The top number, the systolic pressure, is when the veins pump, or excuse me, when the ventricles contract and the arteries have blood rush through them. That is the pressure we're measuring. We all know that, right? If you feel for your pulse, you'll feel that throb, the throbbing of your pulse, representing your heart beating. That throb, the apex, the peak of that throb, is the systolic pressure that we're measuring. So systolic versus diastolic. So systolic pressure is the amount of pressure as blood rushes through the arteries. Diastolic pressure is just the residual pressure that is consistent in the system when the heart is not pumping blood. And like we said, general, number that we consider to be normal is 120 over 80, but it varies greatly depending on the person. And there's lots of different emerging sciences about what normal blood pressure might be considered. So the capillaries, as we were just mentioning earlier, so as we said, the capillaries, one, are the functional units of the cardiovascular system. So we do talk about in the various systems, what is the functional unit? What is the basic structure that serves the most, finite purpose of this system? And so it's the capillaries. Why? Because the capillaries are where all of the nutrient exchange is occurring, and all the delivering and picking up that we talked about is happening. So as we said, these capillaries permeate through every single cell tissue throughout the entire body, delivering the oxygen, picking up the carbon dioxide, dropping off other things and nutrients and so on and so forth, right? And as we said, the capillary is usually so thin that only one little blood cell can pass through at a time. And right, as we said, kind of wrings out the blood cell. So as we said, blood needs to go back to the heart, and blood needs to go back to the heart through the veins. And very similar to like we were just explaining about the heart's valves in itself, where we want to prevent the backwards flow of blood, well, our veins have other valves in place. So one, we have valves in our veins that prevent blood from flowing backwards. As you see, as blood flows into this chamber, it's prevented from going backwards. Now, one, that's just a physical thing put into place to make sure blood doesn't go backwards. And when blood goes backwards, then we have a problem. That's like, the dilated veins, like the varicose veins, varicosities. But we have here several other mechanisms that can aid blood moving. First and foremost is the skeletal muscle pump. As you move and contract your muscles, that compression causes the blood to be the blood vessels to be squeezed and like a toothpaste tube, push the blood from one segment of the vein into the next. There's other things that will also help too, such as breathing, right? So especially around the thorax, breathing is also going to help create pressure and then thus move blood throughout the area. Veins and arteries are usually very near to each other, so the pulsation of nearby arteries can help, as well as gravity can also help, and then of course pressure from such as massage or hydrostatic pressure also will aid in all of this. And this would be the same for the lymphatic or lymphokinesis as well. Now, what separates veins from just the normal, because all of these things right here are consistent even with lymphatic vessels when we talk about lymphokinesis and the movement of lymph fluid through the lymphatic vessels. But veins themselves have like muscles to them that allow for the contractility to make sure that the blood is going back. And we call this vein motor movement of the blood tone. So veins have that one little bit extra than the lymphatic system. So listing major veins, arteries, and so on and so forth, it's a little arbitrary because you'll hear me talk about time and time again in the in this entire program that it's very important to make sure you learn, one, where all the bones of the body are, and then two, where all the regions of the body are, because a lot of these blood vessels are named after the places they're at, such as axillary vein, axillary artery, right? Well, they're in the axilla, which is the armpit. Subclavian artery, subclavian vein, right? They're below the clavicle. So a lot of times we can get by just by, instead of having to learn all of these different terms and write them out, just because you know all of the additional or precursory information, you automatically assimilate this knowledge. Now, we'll point out some stuff that isn't very common that you'll be able to, that you won't be able to pick out solely because of the name. But let's first take a look at the aorta and the branches of the aorta itself. So here is the aorta, where this point right here is where we would have it connected to the heart. As we can see, if we zoom in, here's the semilunar valves. So first branches off of the aorta itself are the coronary arteries, and we have left and right, and then those have branches as well. But the coronary arteries are the main arteries that branch directly off of the aorta to take blood to the heart itself, because the heart is tissue, muscular tissue and various other tissues. It needs blood supply as well. So the coronary arteries are the blood vessels responsible for supplying the heart itself with blood. And, when we talk about, having a heart attack, right, it's usually the coronary arteries blocked. And then if that coronary artery is blocked, you're going to have to call the coroner because you did. So blood travels through the semilunar valves into the aorta. And our first division of the aorta is the ascending aorta as it rises upward, right? Because ascending means to rise upward. Then it arcs over for the aortic arch and then descends downward. And then there's two parts of the descending aorta, which includes the thoracic aorta, which, well, happens to be in the thoracic cage in the thorax area. And then once we pass through the hiatal hernia, which is the passageway in the diaphragm, then the abdominal aorta is where we're at, so in the abdomen. So it's really up here with these branches that we get a little bit more difficult. So going off to the right side of the body, we have our first trunk here, which is the brachiocephalic artery. And I kind of cropped out the word, but brachio, arm, cephalic means head. So this means that this artery is branching off to the arm and the head. Now, and the reason why we have one big branch to go over, and we'll see a second, if we zoom in here, this is the aorta arching over. And so then we have the brachiocephalic branch going this way. So here's the brachiocephalic trunk, and then it branches off to the, as we see, the right common carotid artery, and then branches off into the subclavian artery to then go through and go to the arm. So those are the two main branches of the brachiocephalic trunk, which is the common carotid artery on the right side and then the right subclavian artery. And then we have just the left common carotid and the left subclavian. And as we said, it's space, right? Because of the heart being off-centered a little bit, we have to just shoot that over, just scooch that over a little bit, so we have a bigger trunk to just bring those out. Whereas here's the common carotid, and then here's the subclavian, right? Because they're just right there, because most of these structures are already on the left side, right? We have to have that little bit of extra just to travel over to the right side of the body. So let's just take a quick look through these blood vessels and just list off some ones that don't by nature give you the information they need to understand where they are. And of course, we're not going to go through every single little tiny one, but mostly the important ones that massage therapists would need to pay attention to. So we do see the jugular veins as we talk about in regards to our endangerment sites, namely the anterior triangle of the neck. We want to be careful of the jugular veins, right? Jugular meaning throat, right? So these are by the throat, essentially. So cubital, I mean, you would be able to guess that, right? Cubital means elbow in this case. But renal veins, renal artery, right? Again, that's going to tell us that it's going to the kidneys, because renal means kidneys. Iliac vein means they're in the iliac. To be honest, the only real one that I'd list out for you guys is the great saphenous vein. So we do have lots of blood vessels in the lower leg in the femoral region. We have the femoral artery, femoral vein. But the great saphenous vein is one of the larger veins that also helps to drain blood from the lower legs. And the great saphenous vein being on the inner thigh here, right? So just great saphenous vein doesn't quite exactly tell us where it is. So honestly, I mean, if you really look at all those, you should be able to, postulate where these arteries and veins are just solely because of the names. So the effects of massage on the cardiovascular system. What benefits do we have on the cardiovascular system, and what do we need to be cautious of? So, one, the relaxing nature of massage helps deal with the stress levels and stressors of the body, which can lead to a reduction in heart rate and blood pressure. And this has actually been clinically proven. Of course, by aiding and squeezing the muscles, we can theoretically aid in the movement of blood and make sure that no blood stays stagnant, and make sure that when we loosen up muscles, that blood can flow more freely even after our massage has been finished, right? And the client can have more free circulation throughout the day. Now, there is an interesting bit of information that, and then there's really not a whole lot of evidence to support this. It's still kind of looking on that, but may increase platelet count, which could be associated to tissue repair. It's an idea mostly, but something to consider. But what do we need to be concerned of with massage in the cardiovascular system? Well, anytime someone is on blood thinning medications, we need to be very careful of our pressure so that we do not cause any bruising, because blood thinning medications leave our blood vessels to be susceptible to bruising. If you have low blood pressure, low blood pressure is pretty serious. Definitely don't want to be working on anyone with low blood pressure. Why? Because they can get very dizzy, very disoriented, and as we know, with massage, you already get dizzy and disoriented. And then if we double down on that effect, then that's a very bad sign. Now, of course, we also don't want to work on the flip side, someone with high blood pressure that's uncontrolled, because one, the same reason, but two, high blood pressure is one of the leading causes of having a stroke. Roughly about 25% of all strokes are caused because of high blood pressure. So it's a pretty high statistic that, well, not to say massage would have done anything, but if this person had a stroke on the table and they had uncontrolled high blood pressure, well, it's just not a bad thing, or not a good thing. Patients with histories of blood clots you should avoid circulatory techniques. Yes, to a degree, right? Because, what if they have another clot? Now, there is no evidence to support that massage has ever or could ever dislodge a blood clot, but why chance it, right? Therapists should avoid manipulating the area around pacemakers, stents, and other implemented devices. Absolutely. Sometimes we have these like subdermal devices, usually pacemakers. You could actually feel them on the chest themselves. Obviously, we need to avoid those. And signs of like congestive heart failure or typically other major cardiovascular diseases, atherosclerosis, so on and so forth. We do need to approach our massage cautiously and work within their limitations. So as the suggestion here, shorter massages, typically avoiding circulatory type techniques, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, always remember that, one heart problem could be indicative of other complications, because of the nature of heart complications, they're always just so similar and very interrelated. So always consider that there could be other things, even if they only had one particular issue going on with them. So, and that would lead us into the pathologies, which we've already recorded, thus ending our cardiovascular system lecture. So some of the big takeaways, to be honest, would be, one, the flow of blood through the heart, namely understanding where the major blood vessels are, and understanding the general idea of what these cells are doing. So I think we'll call it on that one and call the cardiovascular system done.